Tariffs taking effect today. The auto sector accounts for 5.3% of GDP and is the fifth largest export sector in the country, accounting for 18% of the country's total exports. Last year alone, the sector exported 35 billion rands worth of cars to the United States market. The agricultural sector stands to be at an immediate disadvantage as some of its competitors like Peru and Chile are subject to a lower tariff of 10%. According to agricultural economist Wandile Sihobo, the most exposed agricultural industries include ostrich products, table grapes, citrus, nuts and wines. This tariff comes into effect after these sectors have enjoyed more than 2 decades of duty-free access to the United States market under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA. But what purpose do tariffs actually serve?
Tariffs are usually introduced when countries want to protect their local industry in relation to imports of that same good into their country. In other words, they want to try and make their own homemade goods as cheap as possible relative to potential imports, so that people will buy the local goods and so that will generate employment within the country itself.
And this is the crux of what President Donald Trump has indicated he wants to achieve in order to supposedly make America great again. This mechanism will likely have the effect of reducing U.S. demand for certain goods over the long term, while at the same time enabling the U.S. government to make a mint from the tariff charges, which ties in with the administration's push to reduce taxes in its domestic economy, while Trump is also pushing for foreign companies to invest in America instead of their own economies.
President Trump has professed that he is desperate to try and resuscitate American manufacturing industry, and that has been gradually eroded by cheap import, whose impact has been gradually eroded by cheap imports, especially from China over the last few decades. And he's doing that by imposing a surcharge on goods that are imported into the United States.
Meanwhile, through the auspices of the Department of Trade and Industry, the government has been trying to engage with U.S. officials to work on getting a better trade deal than the 30% import duty imposed by Trump. The Minister Parkstow says the U.S. government has not to date given a response to a framework deal proposed by the South African government during President Cyril Ramaphosa's trip to the White House in May. It proposed importing $12 billion worth of liquefied natural gas from the United States over a 10-year period, simplifying access of U.S. poultry into South Africa, which would unlock $91 million in trade, and propose investments of up to $3.3 billion in U.S. industries, including mining and metals recycling, while also suggesting the exemption of reciprocal tariffs on areas like shipbuilding and counter-seasonal agricultural trade to preserve supply chains, among other things. Anticipating the higher tariffs would kick in, the Department of Trade and Industry announced the launch of urgent measures to support exporters impacted by the U.S. tariff hikes.
We've established a support desk. We're engaging with the countries all over the world with those that have said, in citrus, we've got a possible agreement with you. We can supply. How do we sort that out? But you're dealing with citrus, you're dealing with chemicals, you're dealing with automotive components, with vehicles. So you're dealing with a whole range of industries. And the impact would be different per industry.
The jury is out on whether Donald Trump's trade tariffs policy will result in a stronger U.S. economy in the long run, given concerns around how the policy may impact on Americans' purchasing power.
They may work in the sense of encouraging local production, but if the market contracts, then even local production will not benefit very much. And the fear with regard to tariffs, especially if they're at a very high level, is that they will generate inflation for the American consumer and erode his buying power and cause a very sharp downturn in the United States economy.
With the 30% duty now in place on South African goods, while detrimental for some sectors in the short term, Jameen argues that the majority of South African exports to the United States, which includes strategic minerals like PGMs, gold, chrome and coal, will not be subject to tariffs, adding that roughly 2.5% to 3% of the country's total export value would be liable to the tariff levy, estimating that this could shave off around 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points of GDP. But this, of course, will be of little comfort to those industries and workers specifically impacted by this latest development. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.